Changing a country isn't easy, but change is inevitable. And the choices we make today will shape our country for generations to come. That's why we've published our first book from Australia Institute Press. What's the Big Idea offers 32 ideas for a better Australia, from leading thinkers such as Bob Brown, Sally McManus, Dr. Emma Shortis, and Professor Brian Schmidt. The essays are a roadmap and a reminder that the solutions exist. Australia just needs the courage to implement them. Visit australiainstitute.org.au or follow the link in the show notes to order your copy of What's the Big Idea today.
Hello and welcome to Dollars and Cents, the Australia Institute podcast where we're talking about just what the hell is going on in the economy. I'm Elinor Johnston-Leake, Senior Content Producer here at the Australia Institute, and as always, I'm talking to our Chief Economist, Greg Jericho. Hello, Greg.
I was waiting for you to say
Sorry.
hello. Smooth introduction. Hello, Elinor. How are you this week?
Oh, I'm doing pretty well.
You always ask me, and it's time I'm going to ask you.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate
How are you going
it.
this week? Has it been good?
It's been very busy because, as everyone might have from listening from last week will know, it was the budget this week. Yay. Yeah, which I found out last week is also, turns out, not Greg's favourite time of year. Yeah. No. Well, Greg, so maybe just to start off with, maybe give the listeners a little bit of a peek behind the curtain. What is it like being in the budget lockup?
Oh, it's a glamorous existence. Look, the budget lockup is basically where all the journalists are going through the budget papers. You're not allowed to communicate with the outside world during this time. Notionally, it's because, there's something in the budget that might move the market. And
not this time.
It never does. It's a complete furphy. It is just so the government has the press captured. They can't listen to anyone else. And so the government is the first one to give out sort of the narrative on what the budget's all about. They've really changed how they do the budget lockups. Back the old way was all the journalists got herded into the committee rooms in Parliament House, and you're all sitting around these big desks, and you'd be sitting next to Fairfax, or News would be in the special room because they're special, and Guardian would often be shunted off to a side room with a few of the foreign bureaus and things. And it was just a madness because you had to lump all your equipment down there, and you were sitting on tables that were too high, on seats that were too low, and it was just awful. Since COVID, they have changed it so, because obviously in COVID, the COVID year, you couldn't do that because it was already a petri dish of vile things. Normally, because the budget's in May, so it's always getting pretty cold here in winter, and it was just notorious for spreading a cold. Everyone came out of it sick with something. So clearly that was a non-starter during COVID. So what they did was they said, okay, everyone can just stay in your news bureaus in the press gallery. A Treasury official came along and handed you your docs, and he sat there and just monitored you to make sure you weren't connected to the internet.
Yeah, not spreading any state secrets.
And since then, governments have decided actually that works better, and also the news bureaus liked it a lot better because you're working on your actual own computer. You're not having to lug laptops around. And also what's happened is it used to be everyone had to come to Canberra. Now they've worked it out that, for example, with Guardian, we've got a Sydney office, and so the Sydney office also has their own little lockdown area that's sealed off from everyone else, so the doors are closed. You can't go into it if you're not in the budget lockup, and they have an intranet working between the Canberra and the Sydney bureaus, and so all of the news bureaus, News, Fairfax, and whatever, are all doing this. So you're actually able to really sort of work in a way that's quite smooth. And so as soon as it 7:30 hits, everyone's just hitting publish and straight up it's going. So it works a lot better. But basically, you're just from 1:30, you're pretty much stuck in your room. You're able to go out to the toilet, and that's about it.
Yeah.
And you got to hand over your phones. disconnect from the internet, and you're just madly going through the papers and trying to work out what's the big story. This year, it was pretty easy because the paper was about that thin.
Yeah.
It was pretty skinny.
Yeah, it was the smallest budget paper ever I read.
Yeah. Nick Evershed at The Guardian, he came up with a really good idea because he had all the budget papers going back to 2007, I think, sort of just there lying around the office. And so we just basically counted the pages in budget paper number 2, which is the paper with all the new spending, all the new tax cuts or tax increases, tax changes. And it was like 80 pages. Back in the Rudd years, it was about 300.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
During sort of the Abbott Morrison sort of years, it was around 200. And now it's down to 80. And it was like, yeah, you guys really were not expecting to do this budget.
Yeah.
Well, just
for a bit of context,
together.
This is the last budget we're going to have before the election, which has not been announced yet, but we're all assuming it will be very soon. What do pre-election budgets like this usually look like? It's
kind of interesting in that this is the third election now in a row where we've had an early budget. See, budgets, as I say, normally in May, but we've had the last 2 and this election as well will be in May. So you can't really have the budget in May while you're on election campaign because Parliament's all shut and everything. So they've had them early, and I got to say, if I was sort of dictator of Australia, one of the things I would be banning is these early budgets because they are terrible.
Yeah.
The 2019 one was terrible. That was the one where, remember, they were going to bring us back to black, and we had all the coffee mugs of Back in Black and all that. And it had wild assumptions on how wonderful and rosy the economy was going to be. And it didn't even need the pandemic to come along for them to be wrong. But it was, just a terrible budget. The 2022 one, the March 2022 budget, was even worse because there was nothing in it except for a $420 increase in the low and middle income tax offset. And it was literally, we're going to give you that for this year. So in March for that financial year, and then it's ending, and then that's it. So it's like, wait, you're looking 3 months ahead.
Yeah.
And that was it. They had nothing. And this one, again, okay, we'll go through what was in there, but as I say, it was thin as anything. And, budgets are meant to be about the government saying, these are all the things we care about. This is what we think matters and needs to be changed. And they did bugger all because no government really knows what to do with a pre-election budget. Do you go big? Do you go small and eke things out? It's all a bit weird, and it's not a real budget in that sense. And it always feels like whoever wins is going to have to come back in probably October and do it again.
Yeah, and you'll get to sit in a lockup again.
I mean, and not least because who knows, by election time or by October, Donald Trump could have upended things,
God.
and everyone's estimates and figures are all completely wrong. So they're not very edifying, I've got to say. They're just like, oh, God, you're doing this because you felt like you had to do it, whereas really they don't need to. You can have the election, come back in Parliament, quickly pass some supply legislation that basically keeps the money going out so that public servants and everyone gets paid and all the, Centrelink payments keep going. And then, do a economic statement that actually has some things, has some policy, has some, brings in all your election commitments. But no.
Speaker, our economy is turning the corner. Inflation is down. Incomes are rising. Unemployment is low, interest rates are coming down, debt is down, and growth is picking up momentum. On all of these fronts, our economy and our budget are in better shape than they were 3 years ago.
Yeah. Well, now we've got sort of the context behind what pre-election budgets usually look like. I guess right now I'd just like you to sort of summarise what this budget is in one not run-on sentence.
Oh, look, thin is pretty bad. Like one word. I mean, really, it was thin. There, as I say, it was a budget to get re-elected. Not a heck of a lot of foresight, even though the big item. The tax cuts don't come in for 2 years.
Yeah, we'll get to them.
But
Yeah.
overall, a kind of forgettable budget, a budget that clearly was not intended to be done.
Now that was sort of a run-on sentence, but I'll take it. Well, we should probably start with the good news. Although, as we talked about last week, talking about it in sort of terms of winners and losers is a bit too simple. But what were the good things that you found in the budget?
Well, I mean, this is what we mean by a pre-election budget, in that there were no real losers. I mean, no one was hurt. There were no, and we're not saying there should be people who are hurt. I'm not saying, I wanted mass cuts to government services or anything. But there was nothing done that we think should be done, and we'll get to some of that later. But with the winners, it was basically, everybody.
Speaker, tonight the government is proud to be delivering more tax relief. Every Australian taxpayer will get a tax cut next year and the year after. This will take the first tax rate down to its lowest level in more than half a century.
This tiny tax tweak budget is a massive missed opportunity.
What's obvious here is that a 70 cent a day tax cut in 15 months' time is just not going to help families today who are really suffering.
The big item, is the tax cut, and it's one that is very much targeted towards low-income earners because it applies to the first tax rate. So if you earn up to $18,200, you pay no tax. That's when the tax-free threshold sort of ends. After that, from $18,200 to $45,000, any income earned between then used to be taxed at 19%. Then when the government brought in the new stage threes, one of the big changes compared to the opposition's old stage three policy was they lowered that 19% to 16%. That was a pretty big cut. What they're doing now is in 26-27, they're going to lower it to 15%, and then in 27-28, they'll lower it again to 14%. So going from 19 to 14% is actually a pretty sizable thing. And the really good thing about such of a tax cut is because it only relates to earnings between 18,200 and 45, it means it doesn't get any higher once you earn over 45,000. Now, everyone who earns more than 45,000 still gets that tax cut because in the weird way how marginal taxes work, you did actually earn some money that was between 18,000 and 18,200 and 45,000. At the moment, it tops out at $268, and then it'll be another $268. So it combined, it becomes $536 a year tax cut for everyone who earns more than 45,000.
So, not nothing.
Look,
pretty
it's
good.
not nothing.
All right.
And the good thing about it compared to, say, the stage three tax cuts, even the ones that change, it doesn't get more for the more you earn. So it doesn't mean someone on 200,000 is getting, a $3,000 tax cut while someone on 30,000 is getting, $50 or something. It's one where the biggest tax cut in terms of how much of a drop in the share of tax you're paying is for someone on 45,000, which is good because that's low income. So
it makes more of a difference.
Look, it's fine, but again, the key thing is it's an income tax cut, so you've got to be earning income. So if you're...
was there anything on JobSeeker?
No, nothing on JobSeeker at all. Nothing on the age pension, disability support pensions, parenting payments, carers allowance, none of this that really helps people who either are earning less than 18,200 or as I say, on JobSeeker. And, the cost of this tax cut, it's not nothing. By the last year of it, or the second year of it coming in, we're looking at around $7.7 billion, which is a fair bit. But, the government could have increased JobSeeker by $200 a fortnight rather than $268 a year for the tax cut, and that would have actually cost less, probably around $5.5 billion.
Yeah.
So about $2.5 to $3 billion less, but they chose we'll do the tax cuts, even though if you're on JobSeeker, an extra $200 a fortnight.
That's a lot of money. Yeah.
You're really going to notice that.
Yeah.
Are people going to notice $268 a year more? Probably not. You're not going to say it's bad. I think it's a good tax cut. But in terms of actually addressing people who are in dire straits, who are literally living in poverty, they kind of forgot it. And so you're right when we say winners and losers is a bit dumb, and it's always every media organization does it. But I think it's right to point out that the losers really in this budget were those who were kind of ignored. It's not that they were hurt. It's not they're going to be paying more. It's that the government said, actually, we're not really caring about you.
Yeah. Well, they didn't even say it. They just ignored it.
They didn't even rate a mention. A bit like, and the other loser, I think, was climate change, which again, not mentioned all. Now, and our colleague Matt Grudnoff made the really good point that the only reason this budget was held was because we had Cyclone Alfred, which pretty much occurred due to climate change, that we had a cyclone that low right down southeast Queensland, which is pretty unusual. And yet Jim Chalmers was able to go through his entire speech without saying climate change. Even when he mentioned Cyclone Alfred, even when he mentioned sort of green steel thing, climate change, not a mention at all.
Well, but before we get into sort of the big missed opportunities, was there anything else in the budget that you think is worth mentioning that was for the better?
Oh, look, most of what was in it had already been announced. The sort of incentives for GPs to bulk bill, again, nice, but it's kind of a bit of window dressing. Because it's just about help increasing the incentive rather than actually touching the Medicare rebate that actually helps GP clinics actually bulk bill. This was just, we'll give you an incentive to bulk bill. There was, a bit of money, not a heck of a lot, about 600 to 700 million over 4 years to help lower the cost of drugs on the PBS, sort of capping them out at $25 a script, which is,
that's pretty good.
It's not nothing. There was the extension of the energy rebate for another 6 months, more political than economic, really. Not a thing that was needed to be done, but given it was due to run out, it was kind of, let's do this and get us past the election.
A lot of tinkering around the edges.
Yeah.
No sort of ambitious
changes. Not a lot for, a bit of spending on housing, but not really.
Yeah.
They slightly increased the Medicare levy threshold. That's going to help, again, people on low incomes, but, it's a lot of tinkering. Nothing that you think, wow, this is showing vision for Australia. This is the Australia we want.
Yeah.
It's kind of a,
well,
crap,
I mean,
we had to do a budget. Let's throw some things in. We had the tax cut. We were going to announce that later, but you got anything else on the shelf? Just put them in and we'll get 80 pages and make it look like that's a budget.
Yeah. Well, because it's a pre-election budget, there obviously, as you said, there isn't too much for anyone to be particularly mad about. But you've already mentioned a few of the big misses: job seeker, housing. Where was the government sort of lacking ambition in this policy?
Well, again, no changes to how we're taxing gas. In fact, the estimates for the petroleum resources rent tax keep going down compared to last year's budget, and even sort of not only are they revising them down, even when you look forward of where they're going, they're still going down so much that another thing they did in the budget was they paused the excise on beer.
Oh, yeah. That seems like a win.
Yeah, I mean, it was just because the excise normally is indexed to go up, in a sense, with inflation, they're pausing that. But here's the classic: even though they're pausing that, beer drinkers will pay more tax in their excise than the gas companies will in the PRT. So, again, they let that go. They still got the fuel tax credit, which is now up to about $10.8 billion a year. Most of it is going to mining companies. A good chunk of it is actually going to coal and gas companies who produce fossil fuels, who are now being subsidized to use fossil fuels. Not great. And they keep noting it. It's a thing that happens every year in the budget. Underneath the table, they always have a note saying, the expected increase, because the numbers keep going up, and by, I think, 28, 29, they're expecting to be about $13 billion a year. They say it's going up because they're assuming that there'll be more fossil fuel being used, more diesel being used. Why? Because they're subsidizing it. They're actually literally paying mining companies, transport companies to use fossil fuel, and then they're like, oh,
They keep using fossil
they keep
fuel.
using it. They keep using more of it than we expect them to.
Yeah.
So, not great there in terms of emissions. They did nothing really for housing, didn't do anything to change the capital gains tax discount, nothing to change how superannuation is taxed. In fact, they seem to have even dumped their previous policy of trying to change the taxation of superannuation on superannuation balances with more than 3 million in them, which was
Just
going
having $3 million in super.
Yeah. I mean, if you're one of the 80,000 people who has that, the 0.5% of people with a superannuation account, that was deemed to be too politically charged, so that's got dumped. So it's pretty wimpy. There's not a lot, and a lot of, carry on doing bad things, carry on selling gas for, and we won't get anything for it, carry on rorting the tax system to keep house prices going up.
So going into the election, I mean, housing obviously seems to be a huge issue for most people, most voters when they're sort of choosing who they're going to vote for this election. But how do you think this budget's going to affect things for the Labor Party, for the Labor government going into the election? How have they sort of set themselves up?
Oh, look, they're going to say that we're delivering a tax cut. The opposition has already voted against it. In fact, come out and said that they will repeal it even.
This is a big spending, big taxing budget, which is for the next 5 weeks, not for the next 5 years. And what we see in it is a promise of 70 cents a day in a year's time, which is going to do nothing to restore Australian standard of living to where it was when Labor came to power.
They've wrecked the economy. They've got this cruel hoax out there at the moment. They're going to, in 15 months' time, offer a tax cut of 70 cents a day.
Does this mean that you would, if you win, repeal the tax cuts that were passed yesterday to make this happen? Because otherwise...
Yes.
Angus Taylor has now confirmed that under Peter Dutton, Australians will earn less and keep less of what they earn.
It gives the government the ability to say, the Liberal Party are going to raise your taxes, we're lowering them. I mean, it's all a bit theatrical and everything, but the reality is that's what they've done. I'm not even sure why the Liberal Party are against it. It's, it only kicks in 2 years' time, Look, there's nothing there, as I say, there was nothing there that's going to have you go, wow, other than, and the biggest wow about the tax cut was it wasn't leaked. Like, it was kept secret. And once you get past that, sort of, oh, wow, tax cut. It's like, okay, now I've forgotten it almost, So I think it's going to be a pretty dispiriting campaign. Each political party or the major political parties are going to be arguing over, how many angels there are on the head of a pin. It's real small
target,
small stuff of minute differences. And, the classic example of just how minute and pointless this all is that on the day of the budget, both sides agreed to pass legislation that was going to gut the environmental law to help basically send the Morgee and skate extinct and ensure that Macquarie Harbour in Tasmania is going to be filled with salmon shit, literally. So they both were happy to do that. And then they'll argue about, oh, you're giving a tax cut that's irresponsible. We're both agreeing not to do anything for job seeker, and none of us are going to touch housing. It's pretty dispiriting.
Well, speaking of the opposition, what have they been announcing sort of recently following the budget?
Yeah,
what's their reply?
I mean, on Thursday night, and so some of you who are many of you who are listening to this will already have happened, but it's all already been leaked that Peter Dutton's going to announce a halving for 1 year, only 1 year, the petrol excise.
So another fossil fuel.
Yeah, he's found a way to subsidise fossil fuels. It's a real up yours to anyone who has bought a hybrid or an EV, because you're not going to get much of a benefit from it, because to get a benefit from this, you actually have to buy petrol and use a lot of it. The more you use, the bigger the benefit. So it is very much targeted at people who love the big dumb utes. Not targeted and this is kind of the one interesting aspect of, I think, about it politically, very much not targeted to those living in inner city, quote unquote, teal seats. It's a real, no, we don't care about you at all. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But again, it's 1 year.
Yeah.
So after the budget, Angus Taylor, his line was, this is a budget for 5 weeks up to the election. 5 weeks, not 5 years. I don't know where he got 5 years from. It's sort of a weird, he just wanted years and weeks.
Yep.
But again, this one, so your response is then, we've got a policy that will last a year and then we got nothing. And in fact, the only policy we've got after that year is to repeal the tax cuts that have just been passed. It's like, this is where the election is, really? This is what we're fighting over?
We're in a housing crisis, a cost of living crisis, a climate crisis, and there's really no ambition.
And for those of you who are wondering, how much is this going to be worth? So Angus Taylor's been saying if you got one car, it'll save you about $750 a year.
That seems like a very... I'd be interested to know what kind of car you'd have to drive for that to be the case.
This is the case because he's talking about it in terms of how much it'll save you a week if you've got 1 tank of petrol. And if you've got 2 tanks of petrol, it'll save you double that. I'm like, is he? And I'm certainly not clear on this yet, but it sounds like he's suggesting that people are filling up a tank of petrol every week, which is pretty rare. You got to use you got to do a lot of driving to use up a tank of petrol, especially, like I do a fairly long commute and, I've got a Camry, fairly bog standard car, and I would probably do it once a fortnight. But the reason why this is important is because if he's assuming that everyone is using a tank of petrol a week, and that's not the case, then their savings, quote unquote, are exaggerated. He's also going around saying, and if you got 2 cars, it'll be $1,500 a year. I'm like, so there's a family with 2 cars that are both using those 2 cars an equal amount. Often it's you have one main car and another car that's just used as a little bit of a runabout.
One's used for the drop off.
It's like, I really am interested to see their figures. And also, again, it's $750 a year compared to that $536. We're talking pretty small differences when you really get down to it. And also, the government, at least we were saying, you earn this, you get the tax cut, whereas they're going to be able to attack the opposition saying, well, one, you got to drive. One, you got to not have a hybrid, because if you have a hybrid, you might only be filling it up once a month. So you don't get much benefit. If you got an EV, you get nothing.
Yeah, you got to drive a fair amount.
So they're really going to target inner city, but the stereotypical quote unquote doctors' wives. I don't even know if they really exist in huge numbers, but those people who think, we bought a hybrid because we want to do something good for the environment. Peter Dutton is basically telling them, up yours. I don't care about you. I care about the people who bought the Hiluxes and the Ford Rangers, which, fair enough, they are the most common car right now because we already subsidise them through our tax system. And now we're going to do it even more. But again, it's like, we're just doing it for 1 year. It's like, well, that's the limit of your thinking. I don't know. Again, as I say, bodes well for a pretty shitty campaign that probably will be called this weekend. We're looking at May 3 or May 10 probably. Strap yourselves in.
Yeah. I'm not looking forward to it.
Looking forward to it.
I'm not looking forward.
No.
Well, I mean, if these are the sort of, grounds that the election's going to be fought on.
It'll be fought on arguing over whether we should have a petrol excise or a small tax cut, and hopefully that there's universal agreement to make the more skate extinct and for us to keep using gas and coal and make the planet uninhabitable. So, I love bipartisan politics.
Well, I suppose, we do want to try and end on a somewhat positive note, which you're making very difficult for me. But just because the major parties want to argue this election on these sort of very quibbling grounds, that doesn't mean that that's what the voters need to settle for. On the Australian Institute's website, we've got a paper called Raising Revenue Right, where we have some great suggestions for how the government can better raise revenue, but also, subsidize the things we want to support and tax the things we don't want to support, like fossil fuels. And we as the voters can actually demand more of our governments.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and certainly I do encourage you all to go to our website because our research is very much based around, we really don't care about parties. We care about policies. We will support any good policy, whoever runs with it. But we certainly have a lot on our website, research around climate change, environment, emissions, the Morgian skate. We won't stop fighting on that battle. And certainly on tax and that ambition that really we want voters to have to demand better from whoever they is their representative, whoever is in their electorate, to be able to go to our website, find the research, and actually kind of gives you the tools to be able, if you're at a town hall, if you're at a street corner and, and someone's there spruiking for your vote, you're actually able to go up and say, yeah, but why aren't you doing this? Isn't this actually hurting the economy? Isn't this hurting housing? Isn't this making it impossible for my children to ever be able to afford a home, or for me to ever be able to afford a home? Why aren't you doing something on this? And the facts are all there. It's not just our opinions. We actually spend a lot of time researching, coming up with some numbers, and not just saying, oh, no, let's just cut petrol rebates. That sounds a winner. We don't really care about sort of, we're not trying to win an election. We're trying to make the country better, a better, fairer, and lower emitting, fossil fuel emitting economy. And so, just because the major political parties especially seem to be letting us down doesn't mean we have to let them get away with it. We can force them to act, force them to listen to us. And, that's really what we're going to be about for the next 5-6 weeks, and even beyond that into the next election, next government. It's always about forcing political parties, MPs, senators to listen to what needs to be heard.
So get out there, get informed, get involved.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that's probably all we've got time for today, Greg. Thank you very much.
And it's a really good note to end on, Elinor, and thank you all very much for listening. I know budgets can be a bit dry, especially when they're very thin like this one was, but we will be back with another Dollars and Cents next week, and probably it'll be the first week of the election. That's a big call, but I don't think it's a big call, but that will probably be the case. Also next week on April Fool's Day, what happens, Elinor?
I feel like it's going to be a surprise for me.
It's going to be the Reserve Bank announcing whether or not they're cutting rates. April Fool's Day,
I will
that
feel
happens.
like an April Fool.
Yeah, so we'll cover all of that. Any other economic news that happens in the meantime, thank you all very much for listening. This episode of Dollars and Cents was recorded on Thursday, the 27th of March, and some things may have changed. If you want to find out more about the budget, go to my 2 columns this week in the Guardian site, which have all the numbers and all the graphs. For more research, especially about the budget, the Centre for Future Work, we put out our budget analysis. Is really detailed and tells you what's really happening, especially in areas like the care sectors and education. You can find all of that information on our website, which is at australiainstitute.org.au. My Blue Sky handle and the handle I use at all social media is at GrogScammer, and Elinor's is at Elinor Johnston Leak.
Sure is.
Really try and encourage her to use more. She needs more stress in her life, and social media is where you can find it.
Well, Blue Sky has been quite nice, though.
Remember as well, throughout the entire election campaign, keep following Amy Ramikis's live blog on our website. She is just doing great work, giving all the information, and our researchers are really trying to fact check everything that's going to be said during this election campaign. So really seek that out. It's a great resource. Also, on social media, give us feedback if there are anything you think we need to talk about. And also you can email us at podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au, and we'll be able to address some of those questions. I think during the election campaign, we should have a bit of a Q&A episode. I think that'll go well, especially on things that you care about during this election. As always, our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. Everyone, have a great week, and we'll see you all next week.
See ya.